Maria wiped down the marble tables at the Grand Imperial Hotel with practiced efficiency. Her black uniform was spotless, her apron freshly pressed, and her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had worked at this luxurious establishment for 3 years now, serving champagne and delicate pastries to people who wore watches worth more than her annual salary. The evening shift was her favorite, though it demanded the most from her aching feet. Tonight, the hotel was hosting a charity gala for the city's wealthiest patrons. Men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in designer gowns floated through the grand ballroom like elegant swans. Maria moved among them like a shadow, refilling glasses and clearing plates, always present but never truly seen. She caught fragments of their conversations as she worked. Stock portfolios, summer homes in the Hamptons, children at prestigious universities. Their world was so far removed from her own that it might as well have existed on another planet. Maria lived in a small apartment on the edge of the city, where the subway rattled the windows every 15 minutes and the neighbors argued loudly through thin walls. But Maria harbored no resentment. She observed these people with curious detachment, the way one might watch characters in a film. Their problems seemed abstract to her, divorced from the immediate concerns of making rent and sending money back to her aging mother in the countryside. The ballroom was magnificent tonight. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across the polished floor. An orchestra was setting up on the elevated stage at the far end of the room, their instruments gleaming under the spotlights. Maria paused for just a moment to watch them tune their instruments, that familiar ache blooming in her chest. She quickly pushed the feeling aside and returned to her duties. Mr. Peterson, the hotel's events manager, was particularly demanding tonight. He wanted everything perfect for the distinguished guests, especially for Mr. Richard Ashworth, the billionaire real estate developer who was the evening's guest of honor. Maria had seen Mr. Ashworth before during his previous visits to the hotel. He was a tall man with silver hair and sharp features, the kind of person who expected the world to arrange itself according to his preferences. He sat at the head table now, surrounded by admirers and business associates, looking bored despite the attention. The dinner service went smoothly. Maria and her fellow servers moved in synchronized coordination, delivering course after course of exquisite cuisine. Lobster bisque, wagyu beef, chocolat soufflé. The guests barely noticed the food, too absorbed in their networking and social maneuvering. As dessert was cleared away, the evening's entertainment was announced. A renowned violinist from the city's Philharmonic Orchestra would perform several classical pieces. Maria felt her heart quicken as the musician took the stage. He was an older gentleman with distinguished gray hair and confident posture. He positioned his violin under his chin with the casual grace of someone who had performed this action 10,000 times. The first notes filled the ballroom and conversation gradually ceased. The violinist's skill was undeniable. His bow danced across the strings, drawing out melodies that seemed to shimmer in the air like the chandelier light. Maria stood against the wall, tray forgotten in her hands, transported by the music. For those few minutes, she was no longer a waitress in an uncomfortable uniform with sore feet. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere the music carried her. Her eyes closed briefly and her fingers twitched slightly at her sides, phantom movements across invisible strings. When the performance ended, the ballroom erupted in applause. The violinist bowed deeply, accepting the adulation with practiced humility. Mr. Ashworth rose from his seat and approached the stage, shaking the musician's hand and speaking words Maria couldn't hear from her position. Then something unexpected happened. Mr. Ashworth gestured to the violin, and after a brief exchange, the violinist handed it to him. The billionaire positioned the instrument awkwardly under his chin, drawing a few chuckles from the crowd. He made a show of attempting to play, producing several screeching, discordant notes that made the guests laugh politely. "As you can see, I have many talents, but music is not among them," Mr. Ashworth announced with a self-deprecating smile. "I believe there is a reward for anyone brave enough to do better. $50,000 to anyone here who can play something beautiful on this instrument." He meant it as a joke, a moment of levity for his social circle. The guests laughed and shook their heads. A few made theatrical gestures of declining, playing along with the game. Mr. Ashworth grinned, pleased with himself, and began to hand the violin back to its owner. Maria's tray slipped from her hands. It clattered against the marble floor. the sound cutting through the ambient chatter like a gunshot. Every head in the ballroom turned toward her. Her face flushed crimson as Mr. Peterson glared at her with fury barely concealed behind his professional mask. "I apologize," Maria stammered, quickly kneeling to gather the fallen silverware and napkins. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, acutely aware of dozens of eyes on her, but she had stopped caring about the attention. Something had broken loose inside her at Mr. Ashworth's careless challenge. All the years of silence, of keeping her head down and her dreams locked away in a small apartment where no one could see them. All the mornings she had risen before dawn to practice in the soundproofed community center before her shift. All the sacrifices and the careful saving, and the hope she had nursed like a fragile flame. Maria stood slowly, the tray now properly loaded. She looked directly at Mr. Ashworth for the first time, her dark eyes steady despite her racing heart. "I can play," she said quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then the laughter began, rippling through the crowd like a wave. These elegant people in their expensive clothes found the idea hilarious. A waitress playing the violin like a virtuoso? Preposterous. Mr. Ashworth's expression shifted from amusement to something colder. He studied Maria with narrowed eyes, perhaps trying to determine if she was mocking him. Mr. Peterson moved toward her, clearly intending to remove this embarrassment from the premises immediately. But the violinist, still standing on stage with his instrument, held up a hand. The violinist's voice carried across the ballroom with unexpected authority. "Let her try," he said simply, his weathered face showing genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Mr. Peterson froze mid-stride, caught between his instinct to remove Maria and his inability to contradict a guest, especially one of such renown. Mr. Ashworth's eyebrows rose in surprise, but then a slow smile spread across his face. He was a man who enjoyed spectacle, even at others' expense. "Very well," Mr. Ashworth declared, his voice dripping with condescension. "Come forward, then. Show us what a waitress knows about violin." The crowd's laughter intensified. Some guests were already pulling out their phones, anticipating a humiliating performance they could share with friends. This would be the evening's most entertaining moment, an amusing story to tell at future gatherings. The help thinking she could perform like a trained musician. Delicious. Maria's legs felt weak as she walked toward the stage. Each step seemed to take an eternity. The ballroom had never felt so vast, the distance between her station along the wall and the elevated platform stretching like miles. She was aware of every whisper, every smirk, every dismissive glance. Mr. Peterson hissed at her as she passed him. "Maria, what are you doing? You're going to be fired for this." She kept walking. She had already crossed a line she could not uncross. There was no safety in retreat now, only in moving forward. Her practical side screamed at her that she was throwing away a job she desperately needed, that her mother depended on the money she sent home, that this was madness. But another voice, one that had been quiet for too long, told her this moment was why she had spent 7 years practicing until her fingers bled. This moment was why she had skipped meals to afford lessons from the retired music teacher who lived above the laundromat. This moment was why she had never given up, even when every reasonable person would have. The violinist extended his precious instrument toward her as she climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Up close, she could see it was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The wood glowed with a deep amber color and the scroll was carved with exquisite detail. This was an instrument worth more than everything Maria owned combined. "Be careful with it," the violinist said softly, but there was no hostility in his tone. "She is temperamental but fair." Maria took the violin with trembling hands. The weight of it was familiar, though every instrument she had ever played before had been a fraction of this one's value. She could feel the quality in the wood, in the perfect balance, in the way it seemed to fit against her shoulder as if it had been waiting for her. The bow felt foreign for just a moment, heavier than she was used to, but her fingers found their grip instinctively. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, blocking out the crowd, the laughter, the luxury, the pressure. There was only the violin now, and the music that lived inside her, waiting to be born. She began to play. The first notes were tentative, feeling out the instrument's voice and adjusting to its peculiarities. But within seconds, Maria found her rhythm. Her bow arm moved with fluid grace, drawing sound from the strings that filled the vast ballroom with unexpected power. She chose a piece she knew by heart, one she had played countless times in the early morning hours when the world was still asleep. Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major, a piece of soaring beauty and technical complexity. It was ambitious, perhaps foolishly so, but Maria was beyond caution now. The laughter died away as if someone had flipped a switch. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that Maria could hear her own heartbeat beneath the music. Her eyes remained closed, her entire being focused on the conversation between her hands and the instrument. She swayed slightly as she played, her body moving with the melody, every technical challenge navigated with the assurance of deep familiarity. The music poured from her like water from a broken dam, all the emotion she had suppressed during years of serving people who never saw her, all the dreams she had locked away each morning when she put on her uniform, all the beauty she had discovered in stolen hours of practice. It all flowed through her fingers and into the air. She played passages of breathtaking delicacy, the bow barely kissing the strings to produce notes that floated like dandelion seeds on a breeze. Then she shifted to sections of fierce intensity, her bow arm driving across the strings with controlled aggression, drawing out sounds that seemed too large to come from a single instrument. The violin sang under her hands. It responded to her touch like a living thing, and Maria understood why the violinist had called it she. The instrument had a personality, a voice that Maria coaxed out with skill and sensitivity. They were partners in this moment, speaking a language that transcended words. Mr. Ashworth's smug expression had vanished. He stood with his mouth slightly open, all pretense of superiority stripped away by the undeniable reality unfolding before him. The guests who had been recording with their phones now held the devices forgotten in their hands, too captivated to remember their original intention of capturing humiliation. Mr. Peterson stood frozen in place, his anger transformed into shock. He had worked with Maria for 3 years and never suspected she possessed such talent. None of them had. She had been invisible to them, just another worker whose inner life they never considered. The violinist watched Maria with tears streaming down his weathered face. He recognized what he was witnessing. True mastery was rare, and it was even rarer to see it emerge from such unexpected places. This young woman in a waitress uniform was not merely competent or talented. She was extraordinary. Maria's fingers flew across the fingerboard, executing rapid passages with crystalline clarity. Her vibrato was expressive without being excessive, adding warmth and humanity to each sustained note. She understood the architecture of the music, knowing when to push forward and when to hold back, building toward climaxes with the instinct of a natural storyteller. As she approached the piece's conclusion, Maria finally opened her eyes. But she did not see the ballroom or the stunned faces staring at her. She was somewhere else entirely, transported by the music to a place beyond social hierarchy and economic circumstance. In this moment, she was not a waitress or a dreamer or a daughter sending money home. She was simply a musician, doing what she was born to do. The final notes rang out across the ballroom, sustained and perfect, gradually fading into silence. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The ballroom remained suspended in absolute silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Maria lowered the violin slowly, reality beginning to seep back into her consciousness. Her hands still trembled, but now from exertion rather than fear. Then the applause began. It started with the violinist, who clapped with steady, deliberate force, his eyes still wet with tears. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted. The sound was thunderous, bouncing off the marble floors and high ceilings, a wave of recognition that washed over Maria with almost physical force. People were standing now, a spontaneous ovation from an audience that had come expecting entertainment, but had received something far more profound. They had witnessed transformation, had seen someone transcend the limitations others had placed upon her. Even in their privileged world, they recognized the rarity of what they had just experienced. Maria stood frozen on the stage, the violin still cradled in her arms, overwhelmed by the response. She had performed before, in small community center recitals and in her own apartment for an audience of 1, but never anything like this. The validation she had secretly craved for years was suddenly real, tangible, echoing through this grand space. Mr. Ashworth recovered first from his shock. He climbed the steps to the stage, his expression complex and unreadable. When he reached Maria, he studied her face for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time despite her having served his table countless times before. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice carrying none of its earlier condescension. "Maria," she replied softly, barely audible over the continuing applause. "Maria Santos," Mr. Ashworth nodded slowly. Then, with deliberate ceremony, he pulled out his phone and made a call. The crowd quieted, curious about what would happen next. The entire evening had veered so far from its planned script that anything seemed possible. "Donald," Mr. Ashworth spoke into his phone, his voice carrying authority. "I need you to prepare a check. $50,000, made out to Maria Santos." He paused, listening, then added, "No, this is not a joke. I will explain later." He ended the call and turned back to Maria, extending his hand. She shook it, her palms still sweaty from nerves and effort. His grip was firm, businesslike, the handshake of someone sealing a deal. "I always keep my promises," Mr. Ashworth said. "The money will be transferred to your account by Monday morning." "You have earned it." The applause intensified again. Several guests approached the stage, calling out questions and congratulations. How long had she been playing? Where had she studied? Why was she working as a waitress? The questions came faster than Maria could process them, let alone answer. The violinist gently took his instrument back from Maria, examining it briefly before looking at her with profound respect. "You have a gift," he said quietly, speaking close to her ear so only she could hear beneath the commotion. "A true gift. What you did tonight, most musicians train their entire lives and never achieve. Where did you learn?" Maria felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "Everywhere I could," she managed. "Teacher Lou, in the building above the laundromat on 7th Street. He retired from the symphony 20 years ago. He charges me almost nothing because he says talent like mine should not be wasted." The violinist nodded, committing the name to memory. "I know Lou. He was principal second violin when I first joined the orchestra. If he is teaching you, then you are learning from one of the best, regardless of where the lessons take place." Mr. Peterson finally found his voice and his professional demeanor. He hurried to the stage, his face a mixture of confusion and barely suppressed panic at how thoroughly his carefully planned event had been disrupted. But he was savvy enough to recognize that fighting against the mood of the room would be foolish. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice cutting through the noise, "perhaps we can give Miss Santos a moment. I am sure this has been quite overwhelming." But the guests were not ready to let the moment end. A woman in a diamond necklace that could have funded a small hospital stepped forward. "You must perform at my daughter's wedding next month," she insisted, pressing a business card into Maria's hand. "Money is no object. Name your price." Others joined in, each trying to book Maria for their own events. Gallery openings, fundraisers, private parties. Within minutes, Maria held a handful of business cards from people whose names she recognized from gossip magazines and financial newspapers. A younger man in an expensive suit, perhaps in his 30s, pushed through the crowd. "I am David Chen," he introduced himself. "I manage several musicians and represent talent for corporate events and concerts. We should talk. You could have a real career, not just playing at parties." Maria's head spun. An hour ago, her greatest concern had been whether Mr. Peterson would write her up for dropping her tray. Now she held $50,000 in her near future and job offers from people whose approval could change her life entirely. But as the initial excitement began to fade, a different feeling crept in. Maria looked around the ballroom at these elegant people, now seeing her as someone worthy of their attention, and she felt oddly hollow. They had walked past her hundreds of times, had looked through her as if she were furniture, had never once wondered about the person beneath the uniform. Now, because she had proven herself valuable in a way they understood, she suddenly mattered. The injustice of it settled over her like a weight. She thought of her co-workers still moving through the room, refilling drinks and clearing tables, still invisible because they had not yet had their moment to prove their worth. She thought of Teacher Liu, who had recognized her potential when she could offer him nothing but determination and a few crumpled bills. He had never needed her to perform in a ballroom full of wealthy people to know she deserved to be taught. She thought of her mother, who had worked 2 jobs to buy Maria her first violin, a battered second-hand instrument from a pawn shop. Her mother had believed in her when there was no evidence beyond a child's enthusiasm that belief was warranted. "Miss Santos?" David Chen was speaking again, trying to get her attention. "I really think we should discuss representation. You have something special, and with proper management, you could be performing with major orchestras within a year. Maria focused on him, on his earnest expression and expensive watch and the calculating look behind his enthusiasm. He saw potential, certainly, but potential measured in commissions and percentages and opportunities that would benefit them both. Was that wrong? Perhaps not. The world ran on such transactions. But standing here, still wearing her waitress uniform with the violin's phantom weight still in her arms, Maria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet in ways she had not anticipated. Mr. Ashworth was speaking with several other guests. Gesturing occasionally toward Maria, she caught fragments of his words. Natural talent, he was saying, hidden in plain sight. Makes you wonder how many others we walk past every day. It was a generous thought, Maria supposed, though it came easy to him now that the revelation had already occurred. She wondered if he would look differently at the parking attendant who would fetch his car tonight, or the housekeepers who would clean his office on Monday morning. She doubted it, but perhaps she was being unfair. The evening continued around her in a blur. More guests approached, offering opportunities and praise in equal measure. The hotel staff, her colleagues, watched from their positions along the walls with expressions ranging from pride to envy to confusion. Maria caught Elena's eye, another waitress who had become something like a friend over the past 3 years, and saw tears on her face. Finally, as midnight approached, the crowd began to thin. The wealthy guests had other parties to attend, other obligations to fulfill. They departed with promises to call, to be in touch to make something happen. Their cards remained clutched in Maria's hand, evidence that this had not been a dream. The violinist approached Maria one final time before leaving. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had considered his words thoroughly. In his hand he carried a simple white card with embossed lettering. "This is my private number," he said, pressing the card into her palm. "My name is Samuel Berkowitz. I have been first chair at the Philharmonic for 23 years. I tell you this not to impress you, but so you understand that I know what I am talking about when I say this. You belong on the world's greatest stages." Maria looked down at the card, then back at his weathered face. "But I have no formal training, no degree from a conservatory, no pedigree that anyone would recognize." Samuel smiled gently. "Neither did some of history's greatest musicians when they began. What you have is rarer than any diploma. You have the music inside you. Everything else can be learned, but that cannot be taught. Call me on Monday. We will discuss your future properly, away from all this chaos." After he left, Mr. Peterson appeared at Maria's elbow. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was a practical man, always aware of the hotel's reputation and his own position within it. "Maria," he began carefully, "I think we should talk about tonight." She waited, expecting termination or at minimum a severe reprimand. She had, after all, disrupted a major event, drawn attention to herself in a way that was decidedly unprofessional, and made the hotel staff the center of attention rather than the guests. "What you did tonight was highly irregular," Mr. Peterson continued. "However, I cannot deny that it has brought considerable positive attention to the Grand Imperial." Mr. Ashworth was very pleased with how the evening turned out. He said it was the most memorable charity gala he has ever attended. Maria nodded, unsure where this was leading. "Therefore, I am prepared to overlook the breach of protocol, provided it does not happen again. You may continue your employment here. In fact, Mr. Ashworth has specifically requested that you serve at his table during his future visits." There was a question buried in those words, an assumption that Maria would want to continue working at the hotel, now that she had other options opening before her. She realized with some surprise that Mr. Peterson could not imagine someone voluntarily leaving a position at such a prestigious establishment. "Thank you," Maria said carefully. "I will need some time to think about my future." Mr. Peterson's eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. Well, take the weekend to consider. But remember, Maria, opportunities like working here do not come often for people in your position." After he left, Elena rushed over and embraced Maria tightly. "That was amazing," she whispered fiercely. "I cannot believe you have been hiding such talent. All this time we have worked together and you never said anything." "I did not want anyone to think I considered myself better than this job," Maria admitted, "or that I was not grateful for the work. Music has always felt like a separate part of my life, something private. Well, it is not private anymore, Elena said with a laugh. By tomorrow, everyone will know about the waitress who played like an angel. You are going to be famous. The word sent a chill through Maria. Famous. She had never wanted fame exactly. She had only wanted to play, to express the music that lived inside her. But perhaps the two were inseparable in the modern world. To play at the highest levels meant accepting public attention and scrutiny. Maria changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room, her movements automatic after years of the same routine. But everything felt different now, as if the person putting on street clothes was not quite the same person who had arrived for her shift 8 hours earlier. The night air was cool as she left through the hotel's service entrance. She lived only a few blocks away, a walk she made every night without thinking about it. But tonight, she moved through the familiar streets seeing them differently, as if the city itself had transformed. Her phone buzzed with messages. Somehow people had already gotten her number. Requests for interviews, offers of representation, questions from local news outlets. She turned the phone off, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. When she reached her small apartment, Maria sat on her second-hand couch and simply breathed. The space was modest but clean, decorated with thrift store finds and a few plants she kept alive through determined care. Her violin case, containing her own humble instrument, sat in the corner where she had left it that morning. She opened the case and lifted out her violin. It was scratched and worn, the varnish faded in places from years of use. The bow had been rehaired 3 times. The case itself was held together with duct tape and hope. Yet this instrument had been her companion through countless hours of practice, her voice when words failed her. Maria played softly, not wanting to disturb her neighbors despite the late hour. She chose a simple piece, a lullaby her mother used to sing. The familiar melody grounded her, reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. She thought about the business cards in her purse, each one a potential door to a different future. David Chen promising concert halls and recording contracts. The wealthy woman offering wedding performances at astronomical prices. Samuel Berkowitz extending a hand into the world of legitimate classical music. Then she thought about her mother, who would need to hear about tonight's events but would struggle to understand their implications. Her mother's world was one of practical concerns and immediate needs, not the abstract possibilities of artistic careers. Maria would send her the $50,000, of course. Well, most of it. That money could transform her mother's life, pay off debts, repair the leaking roof, perhaps even allow her to retire a few years earlier than planned. It was an enormous sum to Maria, though she knew it was pocket change to people like Mr. Ashworth. But what about the rest? What about the opportunities and the offers and the sudden attention? Did she dare believe this could be more than a single magical evening? Did she dare risk the security of her hotel job for the uncertainty of a performing career? Sleep came fitfully that night. Maria's dreams were a confused jumble of concert halls and hotel ballrooms, of her mother's worried face and Samuel Berkowitz's encouraging smile, of music that soared and then fell silent. She woke early on Saturday morning, as she always did. Her body was conditioned to the rhythm of hotel shifts, and it did not care that her life had potentially changed forever the night before, for a moment. Lying in bed watching the early morning light filter through her thin curtains, Maria wondered if she had imagined the entire evening, but her phone, when she turned it on, erupted with notifications, dozens of messages and missed calls, and several news alerts because apparently the story had already spread beyond the hotel's walls. Waitress stuns elite with violin. Performance. Hidden talent revealed at charity. Gala. Cinderella moment at Grand Imperial. Hotel. Maria scrolled through the articles with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. They had turned her life into a fairy tale, complete with the standard narrative beats. Humble origins, hidden talent, dramatic revelation, wealthy benefactor. It was a story people wanted to believe, that skill and dedication could overcome circumstance, that dreams could come true in an instant. But real life was more complicated than fairy tales. The articles did not mention that she still had rent due on Tuesday, or that her mother's medication cost $300 a month, or that musical careers were notoriously unstable even for those with prestigious backgrounds. Teacher Liu called at 8 o'clock. "I saw the news," he said without preamble. "They are calling you a prodigy, which is foolish. You are not a prodigy. You are the result of hard work and dedication. Do not let them diminish your achievement by calling it natural talent alone. His words settled something in Maria's chest. Thank you, teacher. I do not know what to do now. You do what you have always done, Liu replied firmly. You practice. You improve. You honor the music. The rest will follow or it will not. But the music remains constant. That is what I have always taught you. After the call, Maria did exactly that. She took out her violin and practiced scales for an hour, then moved on to etudes, then worked on a piece she had been struggling with for weeks. The familiar routine calmed her racing thoughts and reminded her of who she was beneath the sudden attention. On Monday morning, Maria stood outside the Philharmonic Hall, gripping Samuel Berkowitz's card like a talisman. The building was magnificent, all stone columns and brass doors. The kind of place she had walked past hundreds of times without daring to imagine entering through the front entrance. She had called the number on the card that morning, half expecting it to be disconnected, or to reach some assistant who would tell her the offer had been a moment of emotional generosity that should not be taken seriously. Instead, Samuel himself had answered, his voice warm and immediately recognizing hers. Come at 10, he had said simply. Use the artist entrance on the west side. I will be waiting. Now, standing before those doors, Maria felt the weight of the decision she was about to make. Walking through them meant acknowledging that Friday night had not been an anomaly, that she was choosing to pursue something uncertain over the safety of her hotel job. The $50,000 check had arrived in her account that morning, exactly as Mr. Ashworth had promised. It sat there like a safety net, enough money to take risks she could never have considered before. She had already sent $30,000 to her mother, whose tearful phone call had lasted nearly an hour. Maria pushed through the artist entrance and found herself in a utilitarian corridor, so different from the grand public spaces of the concert hall. A young man with headphones around his neck directed her to the third-floor rehearsal room B, where Samuel waited. The room was intimate, designed for small ensemble practice. Samuel stood by the window, sunlight illuminating his silver hair. He turned when she entered, and his smile was genuine. You came, he said, as if there had been doubt. I wondered if perhaps you would decide that the hotel was safer, more predictable. Many talented people choose security over possibility. I'm still not certain what I am choosing, Maria admitted. This all feels unreal. Samuel gestured to a chair and they sat facing each other. Let me be honest with you about what a career in classical music looks like. It is not what happened on Friday night. That was drama and spectacle and luck. The real work is hours of practice every day. It is auditions where you are rejected for reasons having nothing to do with your talent. It is playing for audiences who do not appreciate what you do. It is financial uncertainty and artistic compromise and endless repetition. Maria listened carefully, appreciating his candor. Are you trying to discourage me? No, Samuel replied. I am trying to ensure you understand what you would be committing to. Because once you step onto this path fully, it becomes difficult to turn back. You will sacrifice other possibilities, other versions of your life. I need to know you want this for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Because you cannot imagine not doing it. Because the music matters more than comfort or security or approval. Because you are willing to endure the difficult parts for the privilege of the transcendent moments. Samuel's eyes were intense. So tell me, Maria, why do you play? She thought about the question, really thought about it. When I play, I feel most like myself. The rest of my life, I am playing a role. Dutiful daughter, reliable employee, polite service worker. But with the violin, I am just Maria. The music lets me be honest in ways I cannot be anywhere else. Samuel nodded slowly. That is a good answer. Now play something for me. Not to impress, not to prove anything. Just play. Maria took out her worn violin, suddenly self-conscious about its condition in this professional space. But as soon as the bow touched the strings, such concerns evaporated. She chose a Bach sonata, one of her favorites, and let the music speak. Samuel listened with closed eyes, his face peaceful. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. You have technical weaknesses. Your vibrato is inconsistent in the higher positions. You rush slightly in fast passages. Your bow control could be more refined. These things can be fixed with proper instruction. Maria felt her stomach sink slightly, but Samuel continued. However, you have something that cannot be taught. You understand the emotional architecture of music. You know when to breathe, when to push, when to hold back. You play with honesty and intelligence. Many conservatory graduates never achieve what you already possess. He stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner, returning with a folder. I have taken the liberty of researching some options for you. There are several paths we could explore. Private coaching with me and other members of the Philharmonic. Enrollment in advanced technique courses, though you would need to audition. Applications to competitions that could raise your profile. Each path has advantages and challenges. They spent the next 2 hours discussing possibilities, and Maria's head swam with information. Samuel had connections throughout the classical music world, and he was offering to open doors that would normally remain closed to someone without traditional credentials. But I must ask, Samuel said as their meeting concluded, what about money? Training at this level is expensive, and while the check from Mr. Ashworth is generous, it will not last forever if you are not earning. Maria had been thinking about this. Some of the people from Friday night offered paying performances. Weddings, parties, corporate events. I could do those to support myself while training. Samuel's expression became complicated. You could. Many musicians survive that way. But be careful not to let it consume you. There is a difference between playing music and being entertainment. Both have value, but they serve different purposes. You must decide which matters more to you. It was a question Maria would grapple with for weeks to come. She began taking lessons with Samuel twice a week, expensive sessions that challenged everything she thought she knew about playing violin. He was a demanding teacher, stopping her mid-phrase to correct tiny details of technique she had never even noticed. Simultaneously, she started accepting performance offers. The wealthy guests from the gala were true to their word, and she found herself playing at events across the city. Birthday parties for people turning 50 in mansions overlooking the river. Engagement celebrations in private clubs. Product launches where she provided ambiance while people networked. The money was excellent, far more than she had ever earned at the hotel. She had quit her waitressing job after giving Mr. Peterson 2 weeks' notice, a decision that had felt both liberating and terrifying. Elena had thrown her a small goodbye party in the staff break room, and several co-workers had expressed envy mixed with genuine happiness for her success. But as the weeks passed, Maria began to understand what Samuel had warned her about. Playing at these events was professionally acceptable but spiritually draining. The guests rarely listened to her music, treating her performances as sophisticated background noise. She was visible now but not necessarily seen. They valued her skill but did not care about her artistry. She shared these feelings with Samuel during a lesson. I thought being recognized would feel different, she admitted. But sometimes I feel as invisible as I did serving tables. They still see the performance, not the person. That is because you are still playing for their approval, Samuel observed. You are still seeking validation from people whose understanding of music is superficial. True artists play for the music itself, and for the small number of people who genuinely listen. But I need to eat, Maria said practically. These events pay my bills and fund my training. I cannot survive on artistic purity alone. I know, Samuel replied gently. This is the compromise most musicians face. The question is whether you can maintain your artistic integrity while making those compromises, or whether the commercial work will eventually hollow out what makes you special. The tension between these two paths came to a head 3 months after the fateful gala. David Chen, the manager who had approached her that night, called with an opportunity. A major corporation was planning a series of promotional events across the country, and they wanted Maria as featured entertainment. The contract would pay $200,000 for 3 months of work. This is a career-making opportunity, David insisted over the phone. The exposure alone is worth more than the money. You would be performing for thousands of people, making connections that could open every door in the industry. But when Maria read the contract details, she felt uneasy. They wanted her to play popular songs arranged for violin, not the classical repertoire she loved. They wanted her to wear costumes designed by their marketing team. They wanted her to be a character, a story they could sell, not a musician pursuing her craft. Maria sat in a coffee shop, the unsigned contract spread before her on the small table. On paper, the decision seemed obvious. $200,000. National exposure. Career advancement. Security for herself and her mother. It was everything a practical person should want. But she kept remembering the feeling of playing Tchaikovsky in the hotel ballroom, the pure connection between her spirit and the music. She kept thinking about Samuel's words regarding artistic integrity. She kept wondering if accepting this contract would be the first step away from why she had started playing in the first place. Her phone rang. Teacher Lou's number. She had been avoiding his calls for a week, knowing he would ask about the corporate offer and knowing what his advice would be. Maria. His voice was stern when she answered. You cannot hide from difficult decisions by not answering your phone. That is cowardice, and I did not teach a coward. I am not hiding, Maria protested weakly. I am thinking. Thinking is good. But I suspect you are also afraid. Afraid of missing an opportunity. Afraid of being foolish. Afraid of staying poor when wealth is offered. These are reasonable fears, but they should not make your decisions for you. The money is real, teacher. It could change everything. Money always seems to promise that, Lou replied. But it only changes external circumstances. It does not change who you are or what matters to you. Let me ask you something. If you take this contract and spend 3 months playing pop songs in corporate lobbies, will you be the same musician afterwards? Maria considered the question honestly. No, I think something would be lost. Then you have your answer. Unless you decide that what would be lost matters less than what would be gained. That is not a judgment, Maria. It is simply a choice every artist must make. Some choose security and comfort. Some choose artistic purity and struggle. Most choose something in between. But you must know which choice you are making and why. After the call ended, Maria closed her eyes and tried to imagine both futures. In one, she signed the contract, performed for enthusiastic crowds, built a commercial career. She would be successful in ways most people understood. She would be financially stable, perhaps even wealthy. Her mother would never worry about money again. In the other future, she declined the offer, continued studying with Samuel, pursued opportunities in classical music. It would be harder, more uncertain. Success might never come or might come too late, but she would be playing the music that mattered to her, even if fewer people heard it. She thought about Mr. Ashworth's offhand challenge that had changed her life. He had wagered $50,000 on a joke, never expecting anyone to collect. But Maria had collected because she had spent years preparing for a moment that seemed impossible. She had not practiced Tchaikovsky in the hopes of playing at a charity gala. She had practiced because the music itself demanded to be played. Maria picked up her pen and wrote a response to David Chen's contract offer. She thanked him for the opportunity but respectfully declined. She explained that she was committed to developing her classical repertoire and could not take 3 months away from her training at this crucial stage. Her hand shook as she sent the email. She had just turned down more money than she had earned in 5 years of waiting tables. She felt simultaneously empowered and terrified, certain and full of doubt. Samuel called the next day, having somehow already heard about her decision. The music world is small, he explained. Word travels fast. People are talking about the waitress who turned down a corporate contract to stay true to classical music. Some think you are principled. Others think you are foolish. What matters is what you think. I think I am scared, Maria admitted. But I also think I made the right choice for the wrong reasons, or maybe the wrong choice for the right reasons. I do not know anymore. Samuel laughed, a warm sound that eased Maria's anxiety slightly. That confusion is normal. It means you are thinking deeply about what you want from your life. Let me tell you something that might help. Next month, the Philharmonic is holding auditions for additional musicians. Not permanent positions, but opportunities to play with us for specific concerts when we need extra strings. Maria's heart jumped. Are you suggesting I audition? I am not suggesting anything. I am telling you that auditions are open, and I believe you are ready. Whether you choose to audition is your decision. But if you do, and if you succeed, you would be playing actual classical repertoire with professional musicians. It would not pay as well as corporate events, but it would be the real thing. The audition was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Maria threw herself into preparation with an intensity that surprised even her. She practiced 6 hours a day, working on the required pieces until she could play them in her sleep. Samuel was merciless in his coaching, stopping her constantly, demanding more precision, more expression, more control. You are not auditioning to be adequate, he told her during one particularly grueling session. You are auditioning to be exceptional. The committee will have dozens of qualified musicians to choose from. You must give them a reason to choose you specifically. Elena came to visit one evening, bringing takeout from the restaurant where she now worked. She had left the hotel shortly after Maria, finding better pay at a boutique establishment downtown. They sat on Maria's floor eating pad thai and catching up on their lives. "Do you regret leaving the hotel?" Elena asked. Maria thought about it. "Sometimes I miss the certainty of it. I knew what each day would bring. I knew how much money I would make. Now everything feels unstable, like I am balanced on a wire without a net. But you are happier." "I am more alive," Maria said carefully. "Which is not the same as happier exactly. I am more scared and more excited and more uncertain. But yes, I think I am glad I took the risk." Elena smiled. "Good, because I am living vicariously through you. One of us should be brave." The night before the audition, Maria could not sleep. She lay in bed running through the pieces in her mind, her fingers twitching through the fingerings on an invisible violin. She imagined every possible disaster. Broken strings, memory lapses, nerves that paralyzed her ability to play. She imagined walking into the audition room and forgetting everything Samuel had taught her. But she also imagined success. Playing with the Philharmonic, sitting among professional musicians, being part of something larger than herself, contributing to the creation of beauty that would move audiences the way Samuel's playing had moved her that night at the gala. Morning came too quickly. Maria dressed carefully, choosing simple black clothing that would not distract from her playing. She packed her violin with trembling hands, checking and rechecking that she had everything she needed: sheet music, rosin, spare strings, a handkerchief to wipe away nervous sweat. Samuel met her at the Philharmonic Hall. "Remember," he said quietly, "this is just one audition. If it does not go well today, there will be others. You are young. You have time. Do not put so much pressure on this single moment that you cannot perform." But it did not feel like just one audition to Maria. It felt like a referendum on her entire choice to pursue music seriously. If she failed today, she would question whether leaving the hotel had been a mistake. She would wonder if the gala performance had been a fluke, a moment of luck rather than evidence of real skill. She waited in a hallway with 5 other musicians, all auditioning for the same opportunities. They were younger than she expected, most in their early 20s, fresh from conservatories with impressive credentials listed on their resumes. Maria was the oldest at 29, and the only one without formal higher education in music. A door opened, and a woman with a clipboard called the first name. The young man who rose looked calm and confident, his expensive violin case suggesting family resources behind his training. He disappeared into the audition room and the door closed behind him. Maria could hear muffled sounds through the walls. The beginning of a piece, then silence, then talking, then more playing. After 15 minutes, the young man emerged, looking pleased. "They asked me to read something at the end," he told the others. "That is supposed to be a good sign." One by one, the other musicians were called. Some emerged confident, others looked dejected. One young woman came out with tears in her eyes, rushing past without speaking to anyone. The atmosphere in the waiting area grew increasingly tense as the afternoon wore on. Finally, after what felt like hours but was actually only 90 minutes, Maria's name was called. Her legs felt weak as she stood, and her violin case seemed to weigh 100 pounds. She walked through the door into a large rehearsal space where 4 people sat behind a long table, their faces professionally neutral. Samuel was not among them, having recused himself from this particular audition to avoid any appearance of favoritism. The committee consisted of the associate conductor, the principal cellist, and 2 other senior members of the orchestra whose faces Maria recognized from concert programs. "Miss Santos," the associate conductor said, glancing at papers before him, "please begin with the required Mozart piece when you are ready." Maria set up her music stand with hands that trembled slightly. She removed her violin from its case, noting how shabby it looked in this professional environment. The other auditionees had played instruments that gleamed under the lights, while hers bore the scars of years of use. But as soon as she positioned the violin under her chin, all such thoughts disappeared. The instrument was an extension of herself, familiar and true. She took a breath, found her center, and began to play. The Mozart piece was deceptively simple, a test not of technical pyrotechnics but of musicality and taste. Every note had to be perfect, every phrase shaped with intelligence and sensitivity. Maria poured herself into it, remembering everything Samuel had taught her about the composer's elegant style. When she finished, the committee members made notes, their expressions revealing nothing. The associate conductor looked up. "Thank you. Now the Brahms, please." The Brahms was more demanding technically, with passages that tested both her skill and endurance. Maria attacked it with confidence, her bow arm driving through the more aggressive sections before pulling back for moments of tender beauty. She made one small mistake in a difficult shift, but recovered so quickly that she hoped the committee might not have noticed. Again, the committee made notes in silence. Then the principal cellist spoke. "The Brahms was strong. Can you play the passage from measure 42 again? But this time with less vibrato in the opening phrase." Maria's heart lifted. They were coaching her, which meant they were considering her seriously. She played the passage again, adjusting her technique as requested. The cellist nodded approvingly. "Miss Santos," the associate conductor said, consulting his papers again. "I see from your application that you have no formal conservatory training. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I studied privately with Liu Chenwei for the past 7 years while working full-time." "Liu," the principal cellist said, recognition in his voice. "He was with us for many years. Excellent teacher. That explains much about your technique," the associate conductor continued. "Your playing is quite accomplished for someone without traditional training. However, I have some concerns about gaps in your education. Orchestral playing requires more than solo skill. It requires the ability to blend with other musicians, to follow a conductor's interpretation, to read complex scores quickly." Maria felt her hope beginning to deflate, but she maintained her composure. "I understand, sir. I am still learning. We appreciate your honesty." He glanced at the other committee members, some silent communication passing between them. "We would like to offer you a trial position. You would play with us for our spring concert series, 3 performances over 6 weeks. This would give us a chance to evaluate your orchestral skills in a real setting. The pay would be standard for supplemental musicians. Are you interested?" Maria's voice caught in her throat. "Yes, very much yes." The principal cellist smiled, the first warm expression from any committee member. "Welcome aboard, Miss Santos. Rehearsals begin next Tuesday. I suggest you arrive early. Playing in an orchestra is very different from solo performance, and the learning curve can be steep." Maria floated out of the audition room, barely able to process what had happened. She had done it. She had actually done it. In 6 weeks, she would be on stage with the Philharmonic, playing music that mattered, being part of something larger than herself. Samuel was waiting in the hallway, trying to look casual and failing completely. When he saw her expression, his face broke into a wide smile. "They took you. They took me," Maria confirmed, and suddenly she was crying. All the tension and fear and hope of the past months releasing in a flood of tears. Samuel embraced her briefly, a rare display of physical affection from her reserved teacher. "I am proud of you. Not because you passed the audition, but because you had the courage to try. That matters more than the outcome." The next 6 weeks were the most challenging of Maria's life. Playing in an orchestra was indeed completely different from solo performance. She had to subordinate her individual interpretation to the conductor's vision, blend her sound with the other violinists, follow dynamic changes precisely, and navigate complex scores while watching the conductor and listening to dozens of other instruments simultaneously. She made mistakes. Many mistakes. She came in early on an entrance, got lost in a fast passage played too loudly in a delicate section. The other musicians were patient but professional, correcting her errors without coddling her. She was expected to keep up, to learn quickly, to meet the orchestra's standards without special accommodation. Maria practiced obsessively, taking home scores to study, arriving hours early to rehearsals, staying late to work on difficult sections. Her entire life narrowed to music and sleep with little room for anything else. She turned down private performance offers, living off her savings from the corporate events she had played before. The day of the first concert arrived with terrifying speed. Maria sat in the second violin section, surrounded by musicians whose skill and experience dwarfed her own. She wore the orchestra's concert black, her hair styled in the same neat bun she had worn as a waitress, though now it felt like an artist's choice rather than a uniform requirement. The concert hall filled with audience members, their expectant murmur rising to the high ceiling. Maria could not see them from her position on stage, but she could feel their presence, Hundreds of people who had come to hear great music performed excellently. The conductor raised his baton and silence fell. Then, with a downward stroke, the music began. Maria lost herself in the performance, her individual voice merging with the collective sound of the orchestra. She was not Maria Santos, the former waitress, or Maria Santos, the viral sensation from the hotel gala. She was simply one musician among many, contributing her part to the creation of something beautiful and larger than any individual could achieve alone. The concert was a success. The audience's applause was thunderous, and the orchestra took several bows. As Maria stood with her fellow musicians, acknowledging the appreciation, she felt a profound sense of belonging she had never experienced before. After the concert, several audience members approached her in the lobby. Some recognized her from news coverage of the hotel incident. Now 6 months in the past, they congratulated her on her journey, called her inspiring, asked for photographs. Maria was polite but brief, uncomfortable with attention that focused on her story rather than the music. But one older woman waited until the others had dispersed before approaching. She had tears in her eyes. "I was at the charity gala," she said softly. "I was one of the people who laughed when you said you could play. I have felt ashamed about that for months. Tonight, hearing you play as part of this orchestra, I wanted to tell you that I am sorry, and I wanted to thank you for teaching me an important lesson about assumptions and prejudice." Maria took the woman's hand. "Thank you for telling me that. It means more than you might think." The remaining concerts of the trial period went well, and the orchestra invited Maria to continue as a regular supplemental musician. It was not a permanent position, not a guaranteed income, but it was a foothold in the world she had dreamed of entering. She continued studying with Samuel, continued taking private performance gigs when they did not conflict with orchestra commitments, continued living carefully within her means. The viral fame from the hotel gala had faded, replaced by the slower, steadier recognition that came from consistent quality work. One evening, a year after that fateful night at the Grand Imperial Hotel, Maria found herself walking past the building. She had not returned since her final shift, had deliberately avoided the area. But tonight, attending a concert at a nearby venue, she passed the familiar service entrance where she had entered and exited hundreds of times. On impulse, she walked through the front entrance instead, into the marble lobby where wealthy guests checked in and out. A different young woman in a waitress uniform hurried past carrying a tray, eyes down, focused on her task. Maria wondered what dreams that woman might harbor, what talents she might possess that no one knew about. The current events manager, whom Maria did not recognize, approached with a professional smile. "Are you checking in, miss?" "No," Maria replied. "I used to work here. I was just remembering." The manager's eyes widened with recognition. "You are Maria Santos, the violinist. There are pictures of you on our wall in the staff area. You are quite famous among our employees. An inspiration." Maria felt uncomfortable with the hero worship in the woman's voice. "I was lucky," she said carefully. "I happened to be in the right place at the right moment." "Perhaps," the manager replied, "but you were also prepared. Luck favors those who are ready to seize it." Walking home that night, Maria thought about the journey from waitress to musician, from invisible to visible, from dreaming to doing. It had not been a straight line or a simple transformation. She had not become a different person. She was still Maria, still struggling to pay bills, still doubting herself, still working harder than seemed reasonable for uncertain rewards. But she was also more fully herself than she had ever been. She had found a way to live that honored what mattered most to her, even when it meant sacrificing security and comfort. She played music not because it brought fame or money or validation, though sometimes it brought those things. She played because the music itself demanded to be played, because it was how she made sense of the world, because it was the truest expression of who she was. The violin case in her hand, still held together with tape and hope, contained the same modest instrument that had accompanied her journey. She had been offered chances to buy better violins, had the money now to afford significant upgrades. But this instrument had earned its place in her life. It had been there in the small apartment during early morning practice sessions. It had been there when she played Tchaikovsky for an audience of elite strangers. It had been there through every step of her transformation. Maria reached her apartment as the city settled into night around her. Tomorrow she had orchestra rehearsal. The day after, a private performance at a library fundraiser. The day after that, a lesson with Samuel where he would push her to improve aspects of her playing she had not even known needed improvement. It was a life of constant challenge and occasional reward, of small victories and persistent doubts, of community and isolation, of transcendence and routine. It was not the fairy tale that people sometimes imagined when they heard her story. But it was real and it was hers, and she had fought for every moment of it. She set her violin case gently on the table and made herself a simple dinner. Through the thin walls she could hear her neighbor's television, the sound of traffic from the street below, the familiar symphony of urban life, and underneath it all, playing softly in her mind, was music, always music. The next piece she would learn, the next performance she would give, the next opportunity to translate the invisible language of her soul into sound that others could hear. That more than anything was enough.